Hey, what is going on you guys? It's Epic here and welcome back to a new video on the channel where today we're going to be discussing the new Clawbringer buffs. A lot of people have been asking for my opinion on these and what I think of them, so being the massive Clawbringer main that I am, I want to break down my thoughts today and give you guys my overall take on the newest buffs to the Clawbringer in the latest update for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. So just before we start the video, I first of all want to give you guys like a recap almost of the history of the Clawbringer. So in the first hotfix for Wonderlands, the Firebolt skill had its damage changed from weapon damage to bullet damage, meaning where it says here that you get gun damage is no longer true, you actually get bullet damage. And the TLDR explanation of this is that pretty much every gun that deals bullet damage deals gun damage, but not every gun that deals gun damage does bullet damage. So the nerf to the Firebolt skill was a pretty rough blow to most Clawbringer builds, and a lot of people felt it. It wasn't that pretty, and that's where we thought things were going to just kind of level out at. But unfortunately, next week, there was another nerf, or some people have referred to it as a fix, to the Clawbringer's Ore skill. The Clawbringer's Ore skill used to give a flat increase value on the crit chance, so no matter what your crit chance was, it would just straight up add the value on top of that, making the Ore skill incredibly strong, and it actually made the Clawbringers very, very viable for a long time, becoming pretty much their most powerful skill in the tree. But Gearbox changed that to scale correctly, so the Ore skill was, as a result, subsequently nerfed, whether that be unintentional or not, so the Clawbringers got really, really weak. However, with today's hotfix to Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, the Clawbringer has received a set of buffs which are on screen now. I'm going to go through these buffs and then we're going to break them down after one by one, and I'm kind of going to give you my thoughts on this as someone who has sunk over 200 hours into the Clawbringer. So first of all, the damage radius of the Cleansing Flames melee damage has been increased. This is the first little action skill you get with the Clawbringer. You pull out the massive hammer and you slam the ground, dealing raw melee damage and a fire melee nova. So the radius of that has been increased. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And then after that, pretty much everything in this list here is regarding the capstone in the Clawbringer's tree known as Storm Smite. So it says that the cooldown on Storm Smite has been removed. Storm Smite's damage as it scales with higher levels has been increased by 50%. The targeting for Storm Smite has also been increased, and the Storm Smite's delay between the puddle and the lightning bolt spawning has been removed. So pretty much that's it. That's all they did for the Clawbringer after a month of the class easily being the weakest in the game. I know a lot of people constantly shout how they've been able to make it work. You can make it work, Epic. The Clawbringer's not a bad class. You can make it work. Just to quickly touch on that, I will say that the power of a class should not be measured by how hard it can be carried by another class. The raw power of the Clawbringer is easily the weakest class in Wonderlands, and probably one of the weakest classes, or characters rather, we've seen in Borderlands history. And I don't believe that today these increases have really helped the matter too much. So breaking down firstly why I believe this is going to get really nerdy and really mathematicianist. So if you guys don't want to pay attention to that, that's absolutely fine. But for those of you who do actually care about this, I want to just kind of break down my thoughts on today's changes to the Clawbringer and provide feedback on how we can improve this in the future. So first of all, the Cleansing Flames action skill has had its damage radius of the melee increased. So to kind of break down how this works for you guys, when you summon the Cleansing Flames hammer, once it hits the ground, it does an initial slam which does non-elemental melee damage, and the fire damage you see is a fire nova that does fire ability damage, as the card would say. Now, the reason why Cleansing Flames is so bad, and a lot of people don't use Cleansing Flames, isn't necessarily because that Fire Nova isn't effective, it's actually on the melee damage itself. So in Wonderlands, a lot of things get scaling from various sources in the game, one of them being anything that is remotely considered elemental damage, which is why the Storm Dragon's Judgment does significantly less damage than Cleansing Flames, but is still the better action skill. Dealing elemental damage means that despite this being melee damage, it's lightning melee damage, and as such, it's going to get buffs from anything that buffs lightning elemental damage. This means not only does the action skill benefit from melee buffs, but it also benefits from elemental buffs. Now, unfortunately, the Cleansing Flames action skill does not receive that same treatment. Being raw melee damage, it means that you are solely relying on raw melee increases in order to make that skill deal more damage. Now, the problem that we run into with this is that there is not a single skill in the Clawbringer's tree that buffs raw melee damage. The only skill that we have is Oath of Thunder, but that specifically adds bonus lightning damage to your melee. So while you could technically class it as a buff to melee, it will not actually make Cleansing Flames raw melee damage any stronger. So I'm not really a big fan of this change. I've played around with Cleansing Flames today, and I honestly can't tell much of a difference here. I don't think the radius matters if you're tickling enemies, so the whole change to Cleansing Flames to me is basically invisible. Now, the way that I would have fixed this skill, and the way that I've actually been saying for a while, is to simply change the melee damage on hit to fire melee. While it will kind of suck that this just does fire damage through and through, changing this skill to be fire melee damage will mean that it's going to get increases from fire damage, and as such could be a lot more powerful. But because it doesn't, I feel like today, even after the changes to the Clawbringer, the Cleansing Flames action skill is still going to be an afterthought for a lot of people. Now, moving into the biggest change, because it's like pretty much the whole set of notes here, is the change to Storm Smite. Storm Smite is a capstone which is probably one of the worst in the game, or in fact I'd probably go as far as saying it was the worst capstone in the game before this change. To keep it simple and kind of like a TLDR here, after today's changes to Storm Smite, I feel like this is a capstone which can benefit a lot of people. Now, I've tried it out and I don't think it's all that great. I don't think Storm Smite is inherently bad after these changes today. The changes definitely helped the skill out, and I can say 100% that I have been able to kill enemies with Storm Smite, which is something I just couldn't do before. But there are a few things that still need to be looked at here. Firstly, the targeting for Storm Smite, I just haven't really noticed much of a difference on. It tends to go more in the general direction of an enemy now, but I've not really seen it hitting any of them. Now, another thing that I also want to talk about here is the delay between the puddle and the lightning bolt spawning. While this might sound like a pretty cool change, I honestly would rather it wasn't implemented. And the reason why is because having a delay between the puddle and the lightning bolt actually used to allow Storm Smite to hit multiple enemies at once, because some of them wouldn't always be where the puddle and the lightning bolt were at the same time. So the lightning bolt would come down, the enemy would run around the corner, then the puddle appears and stings them. So I kind of preferred it how it was before, but I'm, gonna go 50-50 with a lot of people on that. That's just personal choice. As for them removing the cooldown, I think that is an absolutely fantastic change to the skill, and something which I think a lot of us have been asking for. So GG's to Gearbox for actually listening there and removing the cooldown on Storm Smite. That alone makes this skill way more handy to use and has increased its viability tenfold, so a really good change. But my overall feedback for the Clawbringer changes today is that they haven't really made all too much of a difference when it comes to using the Clawbringer in a build, and am I going to pick this as my multi-class? The reason is because there are still so many skills in the Clawbringer's tree that are just underwhelming and weak, to say the least. First of all, Storm Breath still giving damage reduction after we've scaled up the chaos level to 35 is only going to amplify just how little use 12% damage reduction gives you, especially when we already have a skill in the tier 2 that gives you more damage reduction. Granted, it's a 5-point skill, but I really feel like we would have been better off changing Storm Breath to give some form of extra lightning damage, or hell, even more melee damage to help with Cleansing Flames. And Firebolt still only dealing bullet damage and not having like a buffed value, or maybe even changing it to be ability damage, which would significantly help out the Clawbringer, means that there is just a lot of skills in this tree that aren't worth going through just to get to this capstone, even if it was worth it. We've also still got skills like Indomitable, which straight up sometimes do just not work, and also has a 2-minute cooldown. But not only that, players have reported that when you proc Indomitable, it doesn't count as a health gate, and as such, if you just get tapped again, you instantly go down, wasting the skill and wasting the point you put into it. After speccing down to the capstone today in my Deathclaw build, which a lot of people are familiar with, I actually saw a damage decrease because of the points I wasted trying to get to the capstone, meaning that the Clawbringer inevitably is probably going to need a little more TLC to make it more viable at endgame. And while I'm not at Chaos 35 yet, I'm already feeling like I need to pick another class just to get there. So that's my thoughts on the changes to the Clawbringer today. I really hope you guys like them. Give me your thoughts and your opinion on the changes in the comment section down below and what you'd like to see done to the Clawbringer in the future to help it out. And be sure to keep your eyes peeled in the coming days or weeks where I'm going to try and do something with that capstone now that it has received the changes it has received. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next one.